La Sonriente, the smiling woman of Mexico City Metro. This is a true story. I have never told anyone, not even Camila, the woman who saved my life that day. 4 years, I have kept this secret buried inside me like a tumor that grows in the dark. 4 years, I have not allowed myself to sleep in any public place, not on buses, not in waiting rooms, not even in the passenger seat of a car while someone else drives. 4 years I have carried eye drops in my pocket, 3 bottles at any given time, because I am terrified of the sensation of dry eyes, terrified of that involuntary moment when your body forces you to blink whether you want to or not. There are things in this world that only move when you cannot see them. Things that exist in the spaces between moments in the darkness behind your eyelids, in that fraction of a second when your eyes close and open again. And once they have chosen you, they will wait. They are patient beyond human comprehension. They will wait until you are completely alone. My name is Diego Ramirez. I am 25 years old. I am a structural engineer living in Mexico City with my wife. From the outside, my life looks completely normal. But I have not been normal since that morning 4 years ago. I have not been whole. And this is the night I met La Sonriente, the smiling woman of the Mexico City Metro. If you are listening to this story alone, I need you to do something for me before I continue. Turn on a light, every light in your room if possible. Check the corners, check behind you. Make sure you are truly alone, and if you are, consider whether you want to remain that way for the duration of this story. Because when I finish telling you what happened, you will not want to be in darkness. And whatever you do, whatever happens around you while you listen to my voice, do not blink. I still remember the smell of that metro station on the morning everything changed. Not the usual smell, not the metallic scent of rails and electricity that anyone who has ridden the Mexico City Metro knows intimately. Not the familiar odor of human bodies pressed together in morning crowds, the mix of cologne and sweat and coffee breath. This was different. This was wrong. This was the smell of damp earth and mold, like opening a door to a basement that has been sealed for 50 years, like disturbing a grave. Underneath it, barely perceptible at first, but growing stronger, was something sweet, something organic, something rotting. And the silence. I cannot properly describe the silence to someone who has not experienced it. The Mexico City Metro is never silent. It is one of the busiest transit systems in the world, carrying 5 million passengers every single day. There is always noise, always movement, always life. But in that moment when I opened my eyes after falling asleep on that staircase, the silence was so complete, so absolute that I could hear my own heartbeat echoing off the tile walls. I could hear the blood rushing through my ears. I could hear things I had never heard before and hoped to never hear again. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, from the night before everything changed, when I was still just a tired college student waiting for his girlfriend to come home. When I still believed that the world operated according to rational rules, when I still thought that monsters were just stories told to frighten children. I was 21 years old, a final-year engineering student at UNAM, the National Autonomous University of Mexico. If you know anything about Mexican universities, you know that UNAM is one of the largest and most prestigious in Latin America. The campus sprawls across the southern part of the city like a small nation home to over 300,000 students, and I was one tiny, insignificant speck among them. I lived alone in a cheap rented room in Coyoacán, a bohemian neighborhood known for its cobblestone streets and colorful colonial houses. My room was nothing like those picturesque buildings that tourists photograph. It was a converted storage space on the 3rd floor of a crumbling apartment building barely large enough for a single bed, a desk, and a small refrigerator that hummed so loudly I had to unplug it to sleep. The walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbors arguing, making love, watching telenovelas at 3 in the morning. My family lived in Querétaro, about 3 hours north of the city by bus. I saw them perhaps twice a year during Christmas and sometimes during the summer break. Phone calls were expensive and I was always busy with classes or work. The distance between us had grown into something more than geographical over the 4 years I had been in Mexico City. We had become strangers who shared blood and memories, but little else. To pay for my education, I worked night shifts at a coffee shop near campus called El Último Café, which translates to The Last Coffee. The name was meant to be ironic, a joke about students who came in desperate for one final caffeine fix before exams. I worked from 10 at night until 3 in the morning, grinding beans, pulling espresso shots, wiping down tables, serving drinks to bleary-eyed students, cramming for tests they should have studied for weeks ago. That month had been particularly brutal. My graduation project was due in 3 weeks, a structural analysis of a proposed pedestrian bridge that required calculations I could barely understand and software I could barely afford. The project fee alone was 2,000 pesos money. I did not have money. I had to borrow from a loan shark who operated out of a barber shop in Tepito. The interest rates were criminal, but I had no choice. Without the project, I would not graduate. Without graduating, the past 4 years of sacrifice would mean nothing. I had been surviving on 4 or 5 hours of sleep each night for nearly 2 weeks. I would work at the coffee shop until 3, walk home through dark streets, study until 6 or 7, sleep until noon, attend afternoon classes, study more, then return to work. The cycle was destroying me. I had lost weight. My hands trembled from caffeine overdose. I would sometimes lose track of conversations, mid-sentence my brain simply shutting down like an overloaded computer. Camila was my girlfriend. She was also my anchor, my reason for continuing when everything felt impossible. We had met 2 years earlier in a calculus class, bonding over our shared hatred of derivatives and our shared love of terrible horror movies. She was studying architecture, which meant she understood the pressure I was under, the impossible deadlines, the professors who seemed to delight in making students suffer. She had been away for a month, completing a mandatory internship at an architecture firm in Querétaro. It was a good opportunity for her career, and it meant she could stay with my parents, who adored her far more than they had ever seemed to adore me. But her absence had left a hole in my daily life that I had not anticipated. She was the person I talked to when the stress became unbearable. She was the person who reminded me to eat, to sleep, to take care of myself. Without her, I had no one. I had counted every single day of her absence. 31 days, 744 hours. I had not seen her face except in photographs. Had not heard her laugh except in memories that grew fainter with each passing week. Had not felt her hand in mine, her head on my shoulder, her breath against my neck as she slept beside me. I was lonely in a way I had never experienced before. Lonely in a city of 20 million people, lonely in crowds, lonely in my classes, lonely at work surrounded by customers and coworkers. The loneliness had become a physical sensation, a hollow ache in my chest that never quite went away. Looking back now, I understand that this isolation was exactly what made me vulnerable, that there are things in this world that can smell loneliness like sharks smell blood in the water, that I had been marking myself as prey without even knowing it. The night before the incident, I received a text message from Camila at approximately 9:45 in the evening. I was at work restocking the pastry display when my phone buzzed in my pocket. "Coming home tomorrow," the message read. "Bus leaves 6 a.m. Should arrive Observatorio around 9. Can you meet me?" I read the message 3 times, my heart lifting with each repetition. I typed back immediately, "I will be there. I love you. I have missed you so much." Her response came a minute later. "I love you too. Cannot wait to see your face." I spent the rest of my shift in a daze of anticipation. My coworkers noticed the change in my demeanor, the stupid smile I could not wipe from my face, the way I kept checking my phone as though her bus might magically arrive early. When I got home that night, I prepared for her return with the intensity of someone preparing for a religious ceremony. I chose my best shirt, a white button-down that she had always complimented, saying it made me look like a real professional instead of a broke student. I shaved carefully, taking my time, not wanting to nick myself. I applied the cologne she had given me for my birthday, the one I usually save for special occasions because it was expensive and I could not afford to replace it. I set my phone to charge overnight, placing it on the nightstand beside my bed. The alarm was set for 7 in the morning, giving me plenty of time to shower, dress, and reach Observatorio station before her bus arrived. I checked the charging cable twice, making sure both ends were firmly connected, phone and outlet, watching the little battery icon appear on screen to confirm the connection. It was nearly 2 in the morning by the time I climbed into bed. My body was exhausted, but my mind raced with thoughts of seeing Camilla, of holding her again, of no longer being alone. I closed my eyes and tried to force myself to sleep, knowing I needed every minute of rest I could get. At 2:30 in the morning, I woke suddenly. Not gradually, not through the haze of dreams, but instantly, completely, as though someone had shouted my name directly into my ear. One moment I was unconscious. The next I was sitting upright in bed, heart pounding, skin covered in cold sweat. The room was dark except for my phone screen, which was flickering. On off, on off, on off. Like someone was pressing the power button repeatedly in a rhythm that felt almost deliberate, almost playful. I reached for the phone, my hand trembling slightly. No notifications, no missed calls, no messages. No explanation for why the screen was turning itself on and off like a strobe light in a nightmare. Probably just a software glitch, I told myself. Some spam notification triggering the display. Maybe the screen was malfunctioning, ready to die completely like everything else in my cheap, falling-apart life. I placed the phone face down on the nightstand and forced my eyes closed. My heart was still racing, though I could not have explained why. The room felt different somehow. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper than they should have been. The air felt heavier, harder to breathe. Probably just anxiety, I told myself. Just stress. Just exhaustion. I did not know then that this was the first sign. I did not know that something had already noticed me, had already begun to watch from whatever dark place it inhabited. I did not know that by thinking of Camilla, by feeling my loneliness so acutely, I had sent out a signal that traveled through the city like a beacon, drawing attention from things that should not exist. I fell back into an uneasy sleep, filled with dreams I could not remember upon waking. Only impressions remained. A woman standing at the end of a long corridor, a smile that stretched too wide, the sensation of being watched by eyes I could not see. And underneath it all, like a soundtrack playing just below the threshold of hearing a sound like giggling. Morning came not through my alarm, but through the familiar sound of my neighbor's voice. Señora Esperanza was a woman in her 50s who lived in the apartment adjacent to mine. She had a teenage daughter named Rosa, who attended a preparatory school across the city requiring an early morning commute. Every weekday morning, without fail, Señora Esperanza would argue loudly with Rosa about getting ready for school. The arguments were always the same. Rosa did not want to wake up. Rosa was taking too long in the bathroom. Rosa needed to eat breakfast. Rosa would be late. This shouting match had become my unofficial alarm clock. It occurred with such regularity, always between 6:45 and 7 in the morning, that I had learned to rely on it more than any electronic device. Señora Esperanza was more consistent than any alarm I had ever owned. I opened my eyes, the argument already in full swing through the thin walls, and reached for my phone to check the time. The screen was black, dead, completely unresponsive. I sat up in bed, the first cold fingers of panic brushing against my chest. I pressed the power button. Nothing. Pressed it again, holding it down for several seconds. Still nothing. The phone was dead, completely drained of battery, as though it had been unplugged for days instead of hours. I grabbed the charging cable and traced it with my hand. It was connected to my phone. But the other end, the end that should have been plugged into the wall outlet, was lying on the floor, nearly half a meter away from the socket. The cable stretched across the gap like an accusation. I stared at it, trying to understand. I was absolutely certain I had plugged it in the night before. I had watched the charging indicator appear. I had checked twice, paranoid as I always was about oversleeping. And yet here was the cable disconnected, as though someone had deliberately pulled it free during the night. I must have kicked it loose in my sleep, I reasoned. Even though my bed was positioned against the opposite wall, too far from the outlet for my feet to reach. Even though I was not a restless sleeper and had never done such a thing in the years I had lived in that room, even though the cable would have had to travel in a curve around the foot of my bed to end up where it was now, a path that made no physical sense. There was no time to dwell on it. Without my phone, I had no idea what time it was. Camilla's bus would arrive at 9. I could not be late. I could not miss her after waiting 31 days. I threw on clothes without caring what they looked like, grabbed my wallet and keys, and rushed out of my apartment. The hallway was empty and dark, the single bulb that lit the corridor having burned out weeks ago with no sign of the landlord replacing it. I took the stairs 2 at a time, nearly tripping in my haste, and emerged onto the street. The sky was still dark. Not the gray of early dawn, but the deep blue-black of true night. The street was empty except for a stray dog picking through garbage on the corner. The taco stand that usually opened at 6 was closed and shuttered. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. I rushed to the door of the apartment next to mine and knocked loudly. Mateo was a fellow student who rented the adjacent room, a quiet guy who studied medicine and kept to himself. We were not friends exactly, but we had the cordial relationship of people who share thin walls and overlapping schedules. He opened the door with bleary eyes and rumpled hair. His expression shifted from annoyance to confusion when he saw my face. "It is 5 in the morning, man," he said. "Are you insane? 5 in the morning? 5 in the morning." The words did not make sense. Senora Esperanza never woke before 6:30. Never. Her schedule had been as reliable as sunrise for the entire year I had lived in that building. But I could still hear her voice through the walls, arguing with Rosa about something, the same tone, the same rhythm, the same words I heard every single morning. I backed away from Mateo's door without responding to his question. He stared at me with concern as I retreated down the hallway, muttering apologies, trying to understand what was happening. It did not matter, I told myself. The time did not matter. What mattered was getting to Observatorio before Camilla's bus arrived. I had 4 hours now instead of 2. That was good. That gave me plenty of time to get there, to find a place to wait, to charge my phone if I could find an outlet. I did not have time to think about the impossibility of what Mateo had just told me. I did not have time to wonder why Senora Esperanza had woken 2 hours early, or why my phone had been unplugged, or why the sky still looked like the middle of the night. I found a taxi on the main road, a yellow Volkswagen Beetle of the type that used to be common in Mexico City before they were phased out for newer models. The driver was an old man with weathered hands and kind eyes, deep wrinkles carved into his face like river valleys on a map. A small statue of the Virgin of Guadalupe hung from his rearview mirror, swaying gently as the car idled. His name was Roberto, he told me as we merged into the thin, early morning traffic. He had been driving taxis for 43 years, starting when he was just 16 years old, and he knew every street in Mexico City like he knew the lines on his own palms. He was the talkative type, filling the silence with observations about the city, the weather, the football scores from the night before. "Observatorio Station, eh?" He glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "You know, that place has history." I was only half listening, my mind occupied with calculations of time and distance. What kind of history? Roberto's voice dropped to the conspiratorial tone of someone sharing secrets. Back in 1978, a woman threw herself onto the tracks there. They say her husband abandoned her after she gave birth to their son, left her with nothing. No money, no family, no hope. Drove her mad with grief. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning, which was not even working. "That is terrible," I said. Roberto nodded slowly, his eyes meeting mine in the mirror. What is more terrible is what people say happened afterward. The woman, they say, she never left that station. Her ghost still wanders through the tunnels searching for something. Some say she is looking for her baby. Others say she's looking for her husband, or for any man who reminds her of him. I forced a smile, trying to appear politely skeptical. I do not believe in ghost stories. Roberto was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, lower, more serious. You may not believe, he said, but she is real. I have seen her myself. 30 years ago, I was waiting for a passenger at Observatorio late at night. I saw a woman in a black dress standing on the platform. She was smiling so wide it did not look human. I blinked and she was gone. I laughed, the sound hollow and unconvincing even to my own ears. You probably imagined it. It was late, you were tired. Roberto shook his head. I know what I saw, and I never picked up passengers at that station again. Not at night, not ever. He paused. You be careful, young man. There are places in this city where the walls between worlds grow thin. Observatorio is one of them. I thanked him for the warning, still not believing, still certain that his story was nothing more than the superstition of an older generation. Mexico was full of such stories. La Llorona weeping for her drowned children. El Charro Negro riding his demon horse through the countryside. Los Duendes stealing socks and causing mischief. I had grown up hearing these tales and had never believed any of them. I did not know then that Roberto had given me the most important piece of information I would ever receive. I did not know that I should have been paying attention, taking notes, asking questions. I did not know that within hours I would wish desperately that I had listened. The taxi dropped me at the entrance to Observatorio station at 5:30 in the morning. I paid Roberto with crumpled bills from my wallet and thanked him again for the ride. He looked at me with something like pity in his eyes, but said nothing more before driving away. The sky was still dark, the stars still visible above the orange glow of the city lights. The streets were nearly empty, just a few early risers walking to work, and a homeless man sleeping on a bench near the station entrance. The Observatorio bus terminal loomed nearby, a massive concrete structure where buses arrived from all over Mexico. I descended the stairs into the metro system, my footsteps echoing against tile walls covered in murals depicting the history of Mexico. The artwork showed Aztec warriors and Spanish conquistadors, revolutionaries and modern workers, the entire story of a nation compressed into colorful images that no one ever stopped to look at. The station at that hour existed in a strange twilight state between night and day. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting their cold white glow across empty platforms and unmanned vendor carts. Most of the lights were working, but several tubes flickered irregularly, creating pockets of shadow that seemed to move when I was not looking directly at them. The effect was disorienting, like being inside a dying heartbeat. A handful of night shift workers trudged toward the exits, their faces slack with exhaustion. A vendor was setting up his newspaper stand near the platform, arranging magazines and tabloids with mechanical precision. A woman in a cleaning uniform pushed a cart of supplies toward the bathrooms. These were the early morning people, the invisible workforce that keeps a city running while everyone else sleeps. And in the far corner of the main hall, I noticed a janitor mopping the floor. Something about him caught my attention, though I could not say exactly what. He was an older man, perhaps 60, wearing the faded blue uniform of the metro cleaning staff. He moved slowly, methodically, pushing his mop across the same section of tile again and again. Not progressing forward, not working through a logical pattern, just cleaning the same square meter of floor over and over like a video loop that had gotten stuck. I watched him for nearly a minute, waiting for him to move to a different spot. He never did. Push forward, pull back. Push forward, pull back. The same motion, the same spot, the same rhythm. Probably just being thorough, I told myself. Maybe there's a stubborn stain. Maybe he is lost in thought, not paying attention to what he's doing. I found a spot on the wide staircase that led down to the platform level. From here, I could see both the entrance above me and the train tracks below. It was a good vantage point, strategic, allowing me to watch for Camilla while also observing the comings and goings of the station. I sat on the cold metal steps, positioned my back against the wall, and prepared to wait. Without my phone, I had no way to entertain myself. No social media to scroll through, no messages to answer, no games to play. I could only watch the people moving through the station and try to guess the time by the changing density of the crowd. I asked strangers for the hour as they passed. 5:45, said a sanitation worker in an orange vest. 6:15, said a young woman with headphones, barely pausing to answer. 7 o'clock, said a businessman in a gray suit, checking his expensive watch with a frown. 7:45, said a police officer making his rounds. I noted the officer's badge. Sergeant Morales. I do not know why I remember that detail. Perhaps some instinct was telling me to pay attention, to record everything, to build a mental map of the world around me. Perhaps I sensed on some level below conscious thought that I would need to remember these details later. The station grew busier as morning progressed. The platform filled with commuters heading to work, students heading to school, vendors heading to markets. Voices echoed off the tile walls, a cacophony of Spanish and indigenous languages, and the occasional English phrase from tourists who had ventured into the metro system. The rumble of arriving trains vibrated through the floor every few minutes, followed by the hiss of opening doors and the surge of passengers. The smell of coffee wafted from a newly opened vendor cart, mixing with the metallic tang of the rails and the perfume of the woman standing nearby. Life was returning to the station. The strange emptiness of the early morning was being replaced by the chaos and noise of a normal day. By the time my internal clock said 8, the staircase was crowded with commuters. I sat among them, invisible in the rush, just another body in the morning flow. No one looked at me twice. No one asked why I was sitting on the stairs instead of catching a train. I was unremarkable. Forgettable, alone even in the middle of a crowd. My eyes grew heavy. 2 weeks of sleep deprivation pressed down on my skull like a physical weight. The noise of the station became a kind of white noise, soothing in its constancy. My head began to nod. Just for a moment I thought, I will close my eyes for just one moment. There are hundreds of people around me. The station is full of life and light and sound. Nothing can happen. That was the thought that killed me, the thought that sealed my fate. The last thing I remember before I fell asleep was the sound of the station. Voices talking, laughing, arguing in a dozen different conversations. The rumble of a departing train, the crackle of announcements over the PA system, the ordinary symphony of a metro station at rush hour. And then nothing. And then silence. I do not know how long I slept. There was no transition, no gradual return to consciousness. One moment I was surrounded by noise and motion and life. The next moment I opened my eyes to absolute silence. The station was empty. Not quiet, not less crowded. Empty. As though every single person had vanished in the time it took me to blink. The vendor carts were unmanned, newspapers still stacked in neat piles, coffee still steaming in an abandoned cup. The turnstile stood still. The platform below me was a desert of gray concrete, not a single human figure visible in any direction. Even the sound was wrong. The omnipresent hum of the fluorescent lights had changed, deepening into something that sounded almost like a moan, like the building itself was in pain. The buzz of the PA system was gone. The rumble of trains on their tracks had disappeared entirely. There was no sound of distant traffic, no echo of footsteps, no murmur of voices from adjacent corridors. And the smell, the coffee, the metal, the press of human bodies, all of it had been replaced by something else. Something damp and ancient, like opening a door to a room that had been sealed for decades. like disturbing a crypt. Underneath that barely perceptible but growing stronger with each breath was another scent. Something sweet, something organic, something rotting. I stood up slowly, my heart beginning to race. "Hello," I called out, my voice too loud in the heavy silence. "Is anyone there?" The words echoed through the empty station, bouncing off tile walls, returning to me distorted and strange. No one answered. Nothing moved. I looked toward the far corner where the janitor had been working. He was still there, still mopping the same spot, still moving with that slow, mechanical repetition, the only sign of movement in the entire visible space. I watched him for a long moment, hoping he would look up, acknowledge me, prove that I was not entirely alone in this impossible situation. But he never paused, never turned. Just pushed the mop forward, pulled it back, pushed it forward, pulled it back. The same motion, the same spot, over and over again. I wanted to walk over to him to ask what had happened, to confirm that I was not losing my mind, but something stopped me. Something deep and primal, buried in the ancient part of the brain that remembers what it was like to be prey. Every instinct I possessed was screaming at me to stay away from that figure, to not draw its attention, to not acknowledge its existence. "He is not real," whispered a voice in the back of my mind. "Do not go near him." It is probably nothing, I tried to convince myself. The station is closed for cleaning. They cleared everyone out while I was sleeping. That is all. There is a logical explanation. There is always a logical explanation. But I knew it was not true. You do not close a major metro station in the middle of rush hour. You do not evacuate hundreds of people without waking a single one of them, without announcement, without noise, without any indication that anything unusual is happening. You do not empty a public space so completely that even the ambient noise disappears. And you certainly do not leave one janitor behind mopping the same spot forever like a broken record. I turned to look down the staircase toward the platform, seeking any sign of another human being. The platform stretched away in both directions, empty tracks gleaming under flickering lights. No trains, no passengers, nothing. And that was when I saw her. At the bottom of the stairs, where I was certain no one had been standing just moments before, there was a woman. She had appeared without sound, without movement, as though she had simply materialized from thin air. One moment the stairs were empty. The next moment she was there, standing on the lowest step, facing directly toward me. She was smiling. There are certain moments that divide your life into before and after. Moments that carve themselves into your memory with such violence that you can recall every detail decades later, every color, every smell, every texture. Moments that change the fundamental nature of your reality, that force you to accept things you never believed possible. This was one of those moments. The woman appeared to be somewhere between 30 and 50 years old. Her face was smooth, unlined, almost ageless, but there was something ancient about her, something that did not match the youthful skin. Her hair was black and long, hanging loose around her shoulders, slightly disheveled but not unkempt. It looked like it had not been cut or styled in decades. She wore a black dress that fell to her ankles, cut in a style that looked decades out of fashion. High collar, long sleeves, the kind of dress a woman might have worn to a funeral in the 1970s. The fabric was faded and worn in places, as though it had been worn every day for 50 years without being washed or replaced. She stood with her arms at her sides, hands, open palms, facing toward me. Her posture was perfectly straight, unnaturally still. She did not move, did not shift her weight, did not blink, did not breathe as far as I could tell. Her chest was completely motionless beneath the black fabric of her dress. And that smile. There was nothing overtly wrong with it. Not yet. It was a pleasant smile, the kind you might give to an acquaintance you pass on the street. Closed lip, polite, perhaps even friendly. The kind of smile that says hello without requiring a response. But something about it made my skin crawl. It took me a moment to identify what was wrong, and when I did, I felt the first true stab of fear. The smile was too wide, just slightly, stretching perhaps a centimeter further than a normal smile should stretch. The corners of her mouth pulled back just a little too far, creating subtle creases in her cheeks that looked almost like the beginning of cracks. I forced myself to nod in greeting, clinging to social convention like a drowning man clinging to driftwood. "Good morning," I said, my voice sounding strange in the heavy silence. She did not respond, did not move, did not acknowledge my words in any way, just kept smiling that too-wide smile, her eyes fixed on my face with an intensity that felt like physical pressure. I told myself she was probably homeless, probably mentally ill. Mexico City had no shortage of people living on the edges of society seeking shelter in the metro system. They slept on platforms, begged for change, talked to themselves in corners. They were harmless for the most part. Sad perhaps, but not dangerous. There was no reason to be afraid. I turned away, making my intention to be left alone clear through body language. I needed to find a way out, to figure out what was happening, to reconnect with the world that seemed to have vanished around me. I needed to find Camilla. I needed to find anyone. But even with my back to her, I could feel her gaze. It pressed against my neck like a physical weight, cold and relentless. The sensation of being watched crawled up my spine, raising every hair on my body. My skin prickled with goosebumps despite the warm air. After several minutes that felt like hours, I could no longer stand it. I turned around. She was still there, still in the exact same position, still staring directly at me. But the smile had changed. It was wider now, significantly wider. The corners of her mouth had pulled back toward her cheeks, further than should have been anatomically possible. Her teeth were visible, all of them, not just the front ones, but the molars as well, gleaming white in the flickering fluorescent light. More teeth than a human mouth should contain. And her eyes. The pupils had dilated enormously, dark circles consuming most of the visible white, like the eyes of someone standing in total darkness, though the station light still hummed above us. Like the eyes of a predator watching prey. I took a step backward, my foot finding the stair behind me by instinct. The woman tilted her head to one side. The movement was the first I had seen her make, and it was deeply, fundamentally wrong. Her head tilted too far, perhaps 45 degrees at an angle that suggested her neck contained no bones at all. The motion was jerky, mechanical, like a puppet being manipulated by an inexperienced hand. A sound filled the station, a crackling like dry wood, breaking like joints, popping in sequence, like bones grinding against each other. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the walls and the floor and the ceiling. But I knew it was coming from her, from inside her, from whatever was hidden beneath that faded black dress. I blinked. And in the fraction of a second that my eyes were closed, she moved. She was 2 steps closer, exactly 2 steps, standing precisely where she had been an instant before, but 2 stairs higher, 2 stairs closer to where I stood, frozen in terror, still facing me, still smiling that horrible, impossible smile, still tilting her head at that wrong angle. I had not seen her move, had not heard her footsteps on the metal stairs. In the time it took my eyelids to close and open, perhaps 200 milliseconds, she had covered the distance without appearing to move at all. And that was when I understood. That was when I realized the rules of this nightmare. She only moved when I could not see her, when I blinked, when I looked away, when my attention wavered for even a fraction of a second. The thing that had once been a woman, the thing that Roberto had warned me about, was coming for me, step by step, blink by blink, and I could not keep my eyes open forever. No one can. The fluorescent lights above me flickered twice, then steadied, casting their cold white glow across the empty platform. I stood frozen on the staircase, my eyes locked on the woman below me, refusing to blink despite the burning dryness spreading across my corneas. I needed to test my theory. I needed to understand the rules of this nightmare before I could hope to escape it. Keeping my gaze fixed on her, I began counting silently. 1, 2, 3. The burning in my eyes intensified, tears streaming down my cheeks as my body screamed for the relief of closing my lids. 10, 11, 12. The woman remained motionless, frozen in place like a photograph, that terrible smile unchanging. 23, 24, 25. My eyes could take no more. I blinked involuntarily, a quick flutter of my lids lasting perhaps a quarter of a second. She was closer. 2 more steps. Now only 3 meters separated us. The confirmation brought no comfort. Every blink, every moment of darkness would bring her closer, and I was already exhausted, already running on fumes from weeks of sleep deprivation. How long could I keep my eyes open? How long before my body betrayed me? I tried to remember everything Roberto had told me in the taxi. A woman who threw herself onto the tracks in 1978. A husband who abandoned her. A baby who died with her. A ghost that wandered the station searching for lonely men who reminded her of the one who left. Maria Elena. That was the name that suddenly surfaced in my memory, though I could not remember if Roberto had mentioned it or if the knowledge came from somewhere else. Maria Elena Cortez. 28 years old, married for 3 years, mother of a 3-month-old son, found dead on the tracks at Observatorio station on October 15, 1978. No witnesses, no explanation. Just a woman and her baby destroyed by a train that was not supposed to run at that hour. My throat tightened as I forced out words. "What do you want?" The silence swallowed my question. She gave no response, no indication that she had heard me at all. Just that smile, stretching wider, the corners now reaching past her cheekbones. And then I heard it. Not with my ears, but somewhere deeper, somewhere inside my skull. A sound like wind through dead leaves, like whispers from the bottom of a well. "You remind me of him." The voice was not a voice. It was a sensation, a pressure behind my eyes, words forming themselves from pure intent. Cold sweat erupted across my skin as I realized she was inside my head, speaking directly into my thoughts. "I do not know who you mean," I said aloud, my voice cracking. "I have never seen you before. I am not who you think I am." The whispering intensified, layering upon itself until it became almost incomprehensible. He left me alone with the baby, said he loved me, then gone. All of them leave, all of them lie. All of them abandon the ones who love them. Images flashed through my mind, foreign memories that did not belong to me. A young woman cradling an infant, her face twisted with exhaustion and despair. A man's back as he walked out a door, suitcase in hand, never looking back. This very platform empty in the early morning hours, the woman standing at the edge with dead eyes and a silent baby in her arms. And then the fall, the terrible, endless fall toward the tracks below. I gasped, stumbling backward up 2 steps. The visions retreated but did not disappear, lurking at the edges of my consciousness like predators waiting to strike. My eyes burned. I had been keeping them open too long, fighting against the biological imperative to blink. Tears blurred my vision, making it harder to keep her in focus. I need to get out of here, I thought. I need to find the exit. But the exit was above me at the top of the staircase. To reach it, I would have to climb backward, unable to look where I was going, unable to watch my footing. One wrong step and I would fall. And if I fell, if I closed my eyes for even a moment during the impact, she would be on top of me. I glanced toward the far corner where the janitor continued his eternal mopping. "Help!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the empty station. "Please help me." The figure did not react, did not turn, did not pause in his mechanical movements. He pushed the mop forward, pulled it back, pushed it forward, pulled it back. Cleaning the same spot he had been cleaning since I first noticed him hours ago. He is not real, I understood with terrible clarity. He is just a loop, a recording, part of whatever this place has become. I was alone, truly completely alone with the thing wearing the shape of a woman. The lights flickered again, longer this time. In that half-second of dimness, I blinked involuntarily. She was on the same step as me now. Less than a meter away, close enough that I could see the texture of her skin, gray and papery, like old newspaper covered in fine cracks spreading outward from her impossibly stretched mouth. Close enough to see that she was not breathing, her chest utterly still beneath the black fabric. And close enough to smell her. The stench hit me like a physical force. Rotting meat and wet earth and something sweet and cloying that caught in my throat and made me gag. The smell of a body left too long in standing water. The smell of something that should have been buried decades ago. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on the step behind me. I nearly fell, but caught myself at the last moment, arms pinwheeling for balance. The movement cost me. In the chaos, my eyes had closed for perhaps a full second. When I regained my footing and looked back, she was directly in front of me. So close I could have reached out and touched her. So close that if she had been breathing, I would have felt it on my face. Her smile was no longer a smile. It was a gaping maw that stretched from ear to ear, the skin at the corners torn and ragged where it had split from the impossible stretching. Her teeth were visible in their entirety, row upon row of them, far more than any human mouth should contain, each one pointed and gleaming like the teeth of a shark. Her eyes were holes, pure darkness without whites or irises or anything recognizable as human. Looking into them was like staring into the deepest part of the ocean where no light has ever reached, where things live that have never known the sun. And from somewhere inside her, from that impossible throat, came a sound. Not words, a physical sound. A grinding, crackling noise like bones breaking, like joints dislocating, like a body rearranging itself into something it was never meant to be. Her jaw was opening wider, unhinging, stretching downward toward her chest in a way that should have torn her face apart, but somehow did not. This is how I die, I thought. This is how it ends, alone in an empty metro station, devoured by something that should not exist. No one will ever know what happened to me. The thought sparked something in me. Not courage exactly, but desperation. The primal refusal of all living things to accept death without a fight. I had two options. I could continue backing up the stairs, keeping her in sight, trying not to blink, and hope I reached the exit before my eyes gave out entirely. Or I could run, turn my back, sprint for the platform, find another way out through the tunnels. The first option was safe but slow. At the rate she was advancing, with each blink she would reach me long before I reached the top of the stairs. The second option was dangerous but fast. If I could run quickly enough, maybe I could outpace her. Maybe whatever rules governed her movement had limits. I made my choice in a fraction of a second. I turned and ran. Down the stairs, not up. Toward the platform, toward the tunnels, toward the darkness that waited beyond the reach of the flickering lights. It was insane. It was suicide. But something in my gut told me that the exit above was not really an exit anymore, that this station had become a closed loop, a trap with no way out except through. My feet pounded against the concrete steps. Behind me I heard nothing. No footsteps, no breathing, no sounds of pursuit. But I felt her. Felt the cold spreading across my back. Like a shadow growing, felt the presence growing closer with every step I took. I reached the platform and kept running, heading for the mouth of the tunnel at the far end. The lights here were worse, half of them dead. The other half flickering in arrhythmic patterns that made the shadows jump and dance. The cold was directly behind me now. So close I could feel it pressing against my shirt, seeping through the fabric, turning the sweat on my back to ice. And then I heard it. Not a whisper in my head this time, but an actual sound, a giggle that echoed through the empty station, high and bright and utterly wrong, like a child laughing at a funeral. The giggle did not come from behind me. It came from inside my skull, reverberating through my thoughts, drowning out everything else. "Do not run," she said, the words forming directly in my brain. "Stay with me. Stay forever." I did not slow down. I plunged into the tunnel, leaving the sickly glow of the platform behind, entering a darkness so complete it felt solid against my skin. I could see nothing. The blackness was absolute, pressing against my open eyes like a physical weight. I ran with one hand outstretched, feeling for obstacles, my other arm pumping at my side. The tunnel floor was uneven, littered with debris I could not see, and twice I nearly tripped before I found my rhythm. Behind me, the giggling continued. But there was another sound now, a sliding, rushing noise, like something being dragged across stone at tremendous speed. She was following me, moving faster than she had on the stairs. Perhaps the darkness freed her from the rules that bound her in the light. Perhaps she no longer needed me to look away. Perhaps she had been toying with me all along, and now the game was over. I ran faster, my lungs burning, my legs screaming for rest. The air in the tunnel was thick and damp, heavy with the smell of mold and standing water, and that underlying sweetness of decay. My foot caught on something, a piece of rail perhaps, or a stone, and I went down hard. My palms hit the concrete first, tearing skin, and then my face, my forehead striking the ground with enough force to send stars exploding across my vision. For a moment I could not move. The pain was everywhere, in my hands, in my face, in my knees where they had scraped against the rough floor. Blood dripped from somewhere on my head, warm and wet against my skin, and the sliding sound had stopped. The tunnel was silent except for my ragged breathing. The cold that had been pursuing me had vanished, replaced by the normal chill of underground air. Even the giggling in my head had gone quiet. I lay there in the darkness, afraid to move, afraid to make any sound that might draw her attention back to me. Seconds passed. Minutes. I could not tell. Time had lost all meaning in the absolute black. Slowly, carefully, I pushed myself up onto my hands and knees. Pain flared in my left ankle, sharp and immediate. I had twisted it in the fall, maybe sprained it. Walking would be difficult. Running might be impossible. I need light, I thought. I need to see where I am. My hands searched the ground around me, seeking anything that might help. My fingers closed around something metallic, a bar of some kind, perhaps a piece of old rail or a maintenance tool left behind by workers. It was heavy, solid, reassuring in a way that nothing had been since I woke up in the empty station. I pulled myself to my feet, using the bar as a cane to support my injured ankle. The pain was significant but manageable. I could move. I could survive. In the distance, impossibly far away, I saw a light. It was faint, barely more than a glow against the overwhelming darkness, but it was there. Another station, perhaps, or an emergency exit, or simply the end of this nightmare. I began limping toward it, each step sending jolts of pain up my leg. The darkness pressed against me from all sides, heavy and malevolent, but I forced myself forward, one step, then another, then another. I had covered perhaps 50 meters when I felt it again, the cold, creeping up behind me like fog rolling in from the sea, stealing the warmth from the air, from my body, from my very thoughts. She had not given up. She had simply been waiting. The giggling returned, soft at first, then louder, filling my head until I could not hear my own heartbeat over the sound of her laughter. "Found you," the voice whispered. "You cannot hide from me. I always find them, the lonely ones." I did not turn around. I did not want to see what she had become in the darkness where no rules applied. I ran. My ankle screamed in protest, threatening to give out with every stride. Blood from my forehead dripped into my eyes, blurring my vision. My lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass. But I ran. The light ahead grew brighter, closer. I could see the outline of a platform now, the shape of stairs leading up toward the surface. I could see figures moving in the glow shadows that looked blessedly human. The cold was directly behind me. I could feel something brushing against my hair fingers, perhaps, or something worse, reaching for my neck, my shoulders, my face. "Do not leave me alone again." I burst out of the tunnel onto the platform, my injured ankle finally giving way as I crossed the threshold between darkness and light. I collapsed on the concrete, gasping for air, my body shaking with exhaustion and terror and relief. The sliding sound behind me stopped abruptly, cut off as though by a switch. I forced myself to look back to see what had been chasing me through the darkness. She stood at the edge of the tunnel mouth, perfectly still, perfectly silent. The light from the platform reached just far enough to illuminate her face, that terrible stretched smile, those bottomless black eyes. But she did not step forward. She remained at the boundary between darkness and light, as though an invisible wall prevented her from crossing. We stared at each other across that threshold. The monster and its escaped prey. And then she did something that haunts me more than anything else that happened that night. She waved, A small wave, almost friendly, the way you might wave goodbye to a neighbor or a casual acquaintance. The gesture was so normal, so human, that it made everything else about her appearance even more horrifying by contrast. The whisper came one final time, fainter now, receding. "I will wait for you. When you are alone again, I will come. Soon." She stepped backward into the darkness of the tunnel. One step, two steps, and then she was gone, swallowed by the black as though she had never existed at all. I lay on the platform, my body broken, my mind reeling, staring at the empty tunnel mouth. And that was when I heard a voice, a real voice, a human voice. "Diego," I turned my head, wincing at the pain, and saw an angel. Camilla was running toward me across the platform, her face twisted with concern and confusion. Behind her, the station bustled with activity. Commuters rushed past, announcements crackled over the PA system, trains rumbled on their tracks. The world had returned. Or perhaps I had returned to it. "Diego, what happened to you?" Camila knelt beside me, her hands fluttering over my injuries. "You are covered in blood. Your ankle is swollen. What is going on?" I opened my mouth to answer, to tell her everything, to warn her about the thing in the tunnel and the empty station and the woman with the smile that stretched from ear to ear. But how could I? What words could possibly explain what I had experienced? She would think I was insane. She would call a doctor, have me committed. She would never believe that a dead woman from 1978 had chased me through the metro tunnels, had tried to keep me forever, had let me go only because I had reached the light in time. "I fell," I said. "I tripped in the tunnel and fell." Camilla's eyes narrowed. "What were you doing in the tunnel? I got lost. I was looking for you and I got lost." It was a pathetic excuse full of holes, but she did not press further. She helped me to my feet, supported my weight as we limped toward the stairs. As we walked, I glanced back one final time at the tunnel mouth. Empty, dark, silent. But on the concrete floor of the platform, just at the edge where the light met the shadow, there were marks I had not noticed before. Scratches in the stone, 4 parallel lines, as though something with claws had been dragged across the surface, or as though something had been reaching for me, had come within inches of grabbing hold before the light pushed it back. I turned away and let Camilla lead me toward the exit, toward the sun, toward what I hoped would be safety. I did not know then that safety was an illusion. I did not know that La Sonriente had not truly let me go. She had simply marked me, claimed me, and retreated to wait. She had all the time in the world, and eventually, inevitably, I would be alone again. On my ankle, hidden beneath my torn pants, 4 scratches throbbed with a cold that had nothing to do with temperature. 4 perfect lines, parallel and deep, that would heal into scars I would carry for the rest of my life. Reminders of the night I met the smiling woman. Reminders that she was still waiting. The hospital released me after 6 hours. The doctors found nothing they could not explain with simple physics: a sprained ankle, contusions on my knees and palms, a superficial laceration on my forehead that required 3 stitches. When they asked what happened, I told them I fell while running for a train. They accepted this without question. People fall in metro stations every day. Camilla stayed with me through every examination, every x-ray, every moment of waiting in sterile hallways that smelled of antiseptic and anxiety. She held my hand when the nurse cleaned the grit from my wounds. She stroked my hair when I flinched at the needle piercing my skin. She did not ask again about the tunnel, or why I had been there, or how I had sustained injuries consistent with fleeing for my life through absolute darkness. Perhaps she sensed that I was not ready to explain. Perhaps she knew that some truths are too large to be spoken aloud in fluorescent-lit examination rooms, or perhaps she simply loved me enough to wait until I was ready. I have never been ready. 4 years have passed, and I have never told her what really happened that morning. We took a taxi back to my apartment in Coyoacan. I remember watching the city scroll past the window, the familiar chaos of Mexico City traffic, the vendors selling churros on street corners, the murals painted on concrete walls, the endless stream of humanity going about their ordinary lives. Everything looked the same as it had the day before. Nothing had changed, except me. Camila helped me up the stairs to my room, settled me into bed, made me soup from a can she found in my nearly empty kitchen. She talked about her internship, about the bus ride, about how worried she had been when my phone went straight to voicemail for hours. I listened without really hearing my mind, trapped in a tunnel where no light reached, where something ancient and hungry had brushed its fingers through my hair. That night after Camilla fell asleep beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the smile, that impossible ear-to-ear smile filled with rows of teeth, those black pit eyes that held no light, no life, no mercy. I did not sleep that night, or the next, or the one after that. Within a week I had developed rituals. Small behaviors that might seem eccentric to an outside observer but felt absolutely necessary to my survival. I began carrying eye drops everywhere, using them compulsively throughout the day to ensure my eyes never grew dry enough to force an involuntary blink. I purchased 3 backup bottles and kept them in different locations: my backpack, my nightstand, my pocket. I stopped taking the metro entirely. The thought of descending those stairs, of standing on those platforms, of entering those tunnels made my chest tight and my vision blur. I walked everywhere, even when it took hours, even when my still healing ankle throbbed with every step. I never allowed myself to be alone for extended periods. If Camilla had classes and I had none, I went to the library and sat among strangers. If she went out with friends, I found somewhere public and crowded to wait. The presence of other people felt like armor, like the light at the edge of the tunnel that had stopped La Sonriente from following me into the world. And I never, under any circumstances, looked into mirrors when I was alone in darkness. This last rule emerged not from logic, but from instinct, from a primal certainty that I could not explain but could not ignore. Something about reflections felt dangerous now. Something about the way mirrors showed you a world that was almost but not quite identical to your own. For a while, these rituals worked. The weeks became months. The months became years. I graduated from university, found a job at a construction firm, married Camila in a small ceremony attended by our families. We moved into an apartment in Roma Norte, a neighborhood filled with coffee shops and bookstores and young professionals building their futures. I began to believe that I had escaped, that La Sonriente had been a singular nightmare, a brush with something supernatural that would never touch me again. The scars on my ankle faded from angry red to pale white, and I almost convinced myself that they were just scars, just marks left by a fall, nothing more. I was wrong. The signs began 3 months ago, small enough to dismiss, easy enough to explain away. I would catch movement in my peripheral vision, a dark shape that vanished when I turned to look directly. I would hear sounds in empty rooms, a soft sliding like fabric across stone gone before I could be certain I had heard anything at all. I would wake in the middle of the night with the absolute conviction that someone was standing at the foot of my bed watching me sleep. But when I turned on the light, I was alone. Camilla noticed the changes in me, the way I startled at small sounds, the way I checked and rechecked the locks before bed, the way I sometimes stood frozen in doorways, staring into dark rooms, unable to force myself to enter. "You are working too hard," she said. "You need to rest." I let her believe that was the explanation. Work stress, exhaustion, nothing that a vacation would not cure. 2 weeks ago, she left for a business trip to Guadalajara. 3 days, she said. She would be back before I knew it. I drove her to the airport. I kissed her goodbye. I watched her walk through the security checkpoint until she disappeared from view. And then I went home to an empty apartment for the first time in 4 years. The first night passed without incident. I kept every light burning, stayed in the living room where windows faced the street, played music loud enough to drown out any sounds that might emerge from the silence. I did not sleep, not really, just dozed in fits and starts on the couch, jerking awake at the slightest noise. The second night I began to relax. Perhaps I had been paranoid. Perhaps the rules I'd created for myself were unnecessary, the compulsive behaviors of a traumatized mind, rather than genuine protections against a genuine threat. At 11 o'clock, I turned off the living room lights and walked to the bedroom. At midnight, I climbed into bed. At 1 in the morning, exhaustion finally overcame vigilance and I fell into deep, dreamless sleep. I woke at 3:33. The room was dark, the apartment was silent, and I was cold, colder than I had any right to be on a warm spring night with the windows closed and the heating system functioning. I lay perfectly still, my heart pounding my eyes, straining against the darkness. Something had woken me. Some sound, some presence, some shift in the air that my sleeping mind had recognized as danger. For a long moment, nothing happened. The darkness remained darkness. The silence remained silence. I began to wonder if I had imagined everything, if this was just another false alarm in a long series of false alarms. Then I heard it. A giggle. Soft and high and utterly unmistakable, coming from somewhere inside the apartment. Not from outside. Not from a neighbor's television. From within these walls, within this space that should have held no one but me. I stopped breathing. Every muscle in my body locked rigid. The cold intensified, spreading across my skin like frost forming on glass. The giggle came again, closer now. From the hallway outside the bedroom door. I should have run. I should have leaped from the bed, sprinted for the front door, fled into the night, and never looked back. But terror has a way of paralyzing the body, of severing the connection between intention and action. I could not move. I could only lie there staring at the darkness, waiting for whatever came next. The bedroom door was open. I always left it open, a habit from childhood, a need to not feel trapped. Now that open doorway was a portal to something I could not see but could feel, approaching step by sliding step. The cold reached the threshold first. A wave of frozen air that rolled through the doorway like fog, carrying with it the smell I had tried so hard to forget. Rotting flesh, wet earth, the sweet decay of something long dead. And then she was there. I could not see her clearly in the darkness, but I knew. I knew from the shape that filled the doorway, too tall, too still wrong in ways that transcended vision. I knew from the cold that emanated from her presence like radiation from a dying star. I knew from the sound that came next, that grinding, crackling noise of a jaw unhinging, of a smile stretching beyond all human limits. She had found me. After 4 years of waiting, 4 years of patience, she had finally come to collect what she believed was hers. I told you. The whisper filled my skull, driving out all other thought. I would wait until you were alone. I could not respond, could not move. Could not do anything but lie there as she began to approach each step, bringing that impossible cold closer, that impossible smell stronger. My arm moved. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, fighting against the paralysis of terror. My fingers stretched toward the lamp on the nightstand, toward the switch, toward salvation or damnation. The sliding sound accelerated. She knew what I was trying to do. She was racing me, moving faster now, abandoning the slow approach for desperate speed. My fingers touched the lamp. The cold touched my ankle. I screamed and twisted the switch in the same moment, flooding the room with light. The cold vanished. The smell vanished. The presence that had loomed over me was simply gone, as though it had never existed. But on the floor beside my bed, illuminated by the lamp's yellow glow, there were wet footprints. Gray, muddy prints that started at the doorway and ended at the edge of my mattress. And on my ankle, on the scars that had finally faded to white, there were fresh marks. Red indentations in the shape of fingers, as though someone had grabbed me and held on. I did not sleep for the rest of that night. I sat with my back against the headboard, every light in the apartment blazing, waiting for dawn. When sunlight finally filled the windows, I walked to the bathroom to wash my face. The mirror above the sink was fogged, covered in condensation that should not have been there on a dry morning, and written in that condensation, traced by a finger that was not mine. Y.A.S. tiempo. It is time. I have been sitting in this apartment for 6 hours now, recording this story, waiting for Camila to come home. She lands in 2 hours. 2 hours until I am no longer alone. But I do not know if 2 hours is fast enough. The temperature has been dropping steadily since noon. The lights have begun to flicker just slightly, just enough to notice. And in the corner of my vision at the edge of perception, I keep seeing movement. A dark shape that vanishes when I turn my head. A smile that stretches impossibly wide. She is here. She has always been here, waiting for this moment, waiting for me to be vulnerable enough to take. I am telling you this story because I need someone to know what happened. I need someone to understand why, if I disappear, it was not by choice. I need someone to remember that there are things in this world that hunger for human loneliness, that feed on isolation, that wait with infinite patience for their chosen prey to make a single mistake. If you are in Mexico City, if you ride the metro, if you ever find yourself alone in an empty station with a woman in a black dress who smiles too wide, do not smile back. Do not look into her eyes. Do not let her know that you can see her. Find people. Find light. Find anything that connects you to the world of the living. And if you are listening to this story right now, alone in a quiet room in the dark hours of the night, I need you to do something for me. Look behind you. There is probably nothing there. There is almost certainly nothing there. But if you see a smile in the darkness, a smile that stretches impossibly wide, a smile filled with teeth that gleam like knives, do not blink, do not look away. And whatever you do, do not. The recording ends here. The file was found on Diego Ramirez's laptop 3 days after his wife reported him missing. His apartment showed no signs of forced entry, no signs of struggle. His phone was on the nightstand fully charged. His wallet was on the kitchen counter cache and cards untouched. The only unusual detail noted by investigators was a series of scratch marks on the bedroom floor, 4 parallel lines running from the doorway to the bed as though something had been dragged across the hardwood. And on the bathroom mirror, written in condensation that should have evaporated hours before the police arrived, 2 words, "Conmigo ahora," with me now. Diego Ramirez has never been found. But if you ride Line 1 of the Mexico City Metro late at night, if you find yourself alone on the platform at Observatorio station, you might see something in the shadows of the tunnel. 2 figures standing at the edge of the light, one tall with a smile stretching impossibly wide, one smaller, newer still, learning the rules of existence between worlds. They do not speak. They do not move while you are watching, but if you blink, they will be closer. And the smaller one, the one who used to be Diego Ramirez, he will be smiling too.